On behalf of the Socialist Equality Party, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you who have travelled here today to attend this rally. My name is Will Marshall and I'll be chairing today's rally. I would ask again, if you can, please move forward. The purpose of this rally, and the one we held in Sydney 1 week ago, is to continue and extend the campaign we have conducted over the last 9 years to free Australian citizen and courageous journalist Julian Assange. In a little under 12 hours, supporters and defenders of Julian and WikiLeaks will be holding a vigil outside the Ecuadorian embassy in London. At this point, I want to state that the Socialist Equality Party totally condemns the decision by the grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia to indefinitely imprison whistleblower Chelsea Manning. Manning refused to answer questions in the grand jury investigation where she was being pressured to incriminate WikiLeaks and Assange, not only for publishing classified information, but in actively seeking to obtain it. Her principled and thoroughly courageous stand, knowing that she could likely be imprisoned, has to be applauded and hailed by workers, young people throughout the world and in Australia. Julian Assange has been the subject of an extraordinary campaign of lies and vilification by governments all around the world, and in Australia by the Coalition, Labor, Greens, and all of the fake lefts. Why is that? It's because he's exposed the ongoing lawless criminality and war crimes of governments throughout the world, particularly the US, but also here. And for that, he has been relentlessly pursued and persecuted over the last decade. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention upheld Assange's case that he is the victim of illegal and arbitrary detention, which completely dismantles the lies that he is somehow voluntarily choosing to stay within the Ecuadorian embassy, as well that he is simply fleeing justice. This was a ruling based on international law, including the Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. This was ratified by both Sweden and Britain, but of course these governments have chosen to ignore this. Assange remains isolated in the Ecuadorian embassy in Britain, refused the basic right of communication with the outside world. He has no access to a telephone or even the internet. His health deteriorates with no exposure to the sun or even the rain, and the clear calculated aim is to break him. Everyone present at this rally is taking a stand against the mountain of lies and deception aimed at blackening Assange's name. But where there are no denials is in the veracity of what he's actually reported, what WikiLeaks and Assange have actually exposed. He's never criticised or never doubted. Assange has always asserted that the US intended to extradite him. This was initially denied, but it was confirmed late last year that the United States has indeed organised secret, sealed charges against him. Despite all the lies, the aim of the US, Britain, Sweden and Australia was to force Assange to face a kangaroo court in America, and possibly worse, to prevent the ongoing exposure of militarism and political corruption. Terry Hicks, father of David Hicks, who was falsely imprisoned as a terrorist, said in support of Assange, If Julian was a famous sports person and the government thought they could use him to promote their own international image, they would be bending over backwards to secure his release. He concludes, the Australian people have got to take a stand in defence of Julian Assange and understand that when they take up the struggle for his freedom, they are fighting to defend their own democratic rights. Nine months ago, the Socialist Equality Party held its first demonstration calling for the freedom of Julian Assange. We demanded that the then Turnbull government utilise its diplomatic powers to secure Assange's release. After all, he is a man who does not face criminal charges, whose actions do not constitute a crime in Australia, who possesses an Australian passport and is an Australian citizen. Both Turnbull and the current Morrison government, however, have refused to carry out their basic diplomatic and legal obligations to one of their own citizens.
Shame.
It is not that they can't, they won't. There are several instances where federal governments have intervened to secure the release of Australian citizens. Government intervention was carried out to facilitate the release of David Hicks in 2007, Peter Grest, the Australian Al Jazeera journalist, and most recently, Hakeem Al-Arabi, a Bahraini-born refugee. All of these citizens were afforded diplomatic and legal intervention by the Australian government to secure their release. But on the question of Assange, there is a deafening silence. And the reason is that he is an ongoing threat to the Australian government and to every government. He has published daily what they daily cover up, including their crimes, corruption and deceit. So what is to be done next? We know that the political establishment, the media establishment, will not listen to reason. If you look back only 9 years ago, the Labor Party and the Greens refused to lift a finger. As journalist and documentarian John Pilger put it when he spoke at the Sydney rally last week, he spoke about how in 2010, Prime Minister Julia Gillard ordered the Australian Federal Police to investigate Assange and hopefully come up with charges. But he was left empty-handed. She was left empty-handed. Pilger made an astute comment in referring to women like Gillard and Bronwyn Bishop, the former Foreign Minister. He said, "What matters above all is not your gender, but the class you serve." There is a constituency which we need to turn to. This is a constituency which is beginning to find its feet again and does have an interest in defending basic democratic rights. On an expanding international front, workers are not prepared to accept any longer the demeaning conditions they face and the lack of a future their children have under capitalism. We have to turn to young people, workers, students. We have to convince them that the same forces that promoted the lies of weapons of mass destruction in order to justify the invasion of Iraq are at it again. The chairperson of the rally, organised by the Socialist Equality Party in Sydney last week, Linda Tenenbaum, emphasised this. She concluded, "We must discuss, educate, inform and explain that the fight to free Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and defend WikiLeaks is essential to the fight to defend the democratic and social rights of the entire working class." Our first speaker today is James Hogan, the National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party. James has played a major role in the preparation and organisation of this rally. He's known by tens of thousands of people around the world as the author of scores of penetrating World Socialist website articles on Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, the US-led wars in the Middle East, and the US-Australia military alliance. He is at the forefront in knowledge of Julian Assange and in the implications of this for the working class. I urge you to give him a very warm welcome.
Well, first of all, I'd like to add my welcome to you all here at a rally to demand the immediate freedom of WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange, and to demand the immediate freedom of courageous defender of democratic principle, Chelsea Manning. Once again, Christine Assange, Julian's mother, as she did last Sunday, has rung me this morning to ask that I convey to you all her thanks for your courage in assembling today in the face of blanket media censorship and tremendous political pressure. She wanted me to extend her thanks for rallying for the liberty of both Julian and for Chelsea. Manning's defiance of the grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia, which has since late 2010, or at least early 2011, manufactured criminal indictments under the Espionage Act against Julian Assange, was and is an inspiration to every worker and young person fighting for their social and democratic rights. Her statement as she left the court after refusing to answer questions does warrant quoting. She stated before the media, "Yesterday I appeared before a secret grand jury after being given immunity for my testimony. All of the substantive questions pertained to my disclosures of information to the public in 2010. Answers I provided in extensive testimony during my court-martial in 2013. I responded to each question with the following statement: I object to the question and refuse to answer on the grounds that the question is in violation of my First, Fourth and Sixth Amendment and other statutory rights." She continued, "On Friday, I will return to federal court in Alexandria, Virginia for a closed contempt hearing. A judge will consider the legal grounds for my refusal to answer questions in front of a grand jury. The court may find me in contempt and order me to jail. In solidarity with many activists facing the odds, I will stand by my principles. I will exhaust every legal avenue readily available. My legal team continues to challenge the secrecy of these proceedings, and I am prepared to face the consequences of my refusal." As we wrote on the World Socialist website on Friday, a more principled and heroic statement could not be expected from anyone. For refusing the ultimatum of the grand jury that she either falsely incriminate Julian Assange and WikiLeaks or go back to prison, Manning is now imprisoned in the William G. Truesdale Adult Detention Centre in Alexandria, Virginia, until the conclusion of the grand jury, which we know has been impanelled for well over 8 years.
Shame! Absolute shame.
Now we join with our colleagues in the United States, in the SEP in the United States, and all those principled organisations and individuals who are rallying around the world to demand her immediate release. In case you haven't seen, Roger Waters, co-founder of Pink Floyd and passionate defender of Assange and democratic principle, published a statement this morning urging participation in this rally today and in the rally in London, and defending Manning and of course defending Julian. Now, last week at Sydney's Martin Place, I drew attention to the fact that the event itself, and more importantly, the support it is receiving in Australia and internationally, reflected in contradictory ways on social media, and all the efforts being made to break through media censorship, reflect two interconnected processes. Firstly, it is the case that the working class, after decades in which it has been suppressed, is coming forward in a massive resurgence of the international class struggle. Around the world, workers are seeking to cast off the shackles of those organisations that have suppressed them and engaging in strikes and protests to fight not only for their interests, but above all for the future of the next generations. The great issue in world politics is social inequality and war. In 2018 alone, the wealth of the world's billionaires increased by $900 billion, or 12%, while half the world's population, 3.8 billion people, saw their wealth decline by 11%. Workers have had enough of a society where the super rich are hiding at least $7.6 trillion and most likely far more in various tax havens. It is now more than 10 years since criminal speculation led to the worst economic crisis since the Depression, and the rich have only got richer at the direct expense of the working people. It is to protect the wealth of the corporate oligarchs that the war crimes exposed by WikiLeaks are committed, that new crimes are being prepared, and the democratic rights of figures like Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning are being trampled upon. Now, the other process that we know is underway is that the best elements of intellectuals, artists and professionals are turning to the working class as the great social force for revolutionary and political change. And Chelsea Manning is without question one of those people. We do not know Chelsea as an individual, but we do know she closely follows political developments, and these include developments reported by the World Socialist website on the Free Assange campaign, such as this rally. Now, my colleague Sue Phillips will shortly be speaking to you about the mass movement of American teachers sweeping across the country, not only for their wages and conditions, but for the rights of the children they are striving to educate. Chelsea has acted in the context of rebellions by Mexican auto workers along the border with the United States, and of course the Yellow Vest movement in France that has shaken the French state to its core. That is the context on which Chelsea took the principled and courageous stand she did. The working class is on the move, and it raises the need for the development of new and genuine socialist perspective and leadership against the pro-capitalist organisations that are responsible for the destruction of workers' rights and democratic rights, the danger of climate change and the threat of war. There is no question that just as the fate of Julian Assange is dependent on what ordinary people do, so is Chelsea Manning's. It has taken barely a few days for her re-imprisonment to disappear from the media. It is as though she, like Julian Assange, is being censored out of existence.
We all are.
That's correct. Now, Manning's actions before the grand jury are in stark contrast to all those who are complicit or silent in the persecution of Julian. They have lined up with the militarist agenda of Labor and the coalition, and they refuse to defend a journalist and publisher committed to exposing great power, criminality and intrigue. As everyone here knows, Julian Assange, for his actions, has suffered death threats, false accusations, endless slander and arbitrary detention for approaching 7 years. He is a class war prisoner, forced to seek asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London because he was thrown to the wolves by the government of Australia. For close to 1 year, he has been denied even the right to communicate with the outside world and speak in his own defence and continue his work with WikiLeaks. Now, as Christine Assange is repeatedly warning through her Twitter account, the denial of medical care and access to direct sunlight has inflicted Julian with serious conditions that threaten his life. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has compared the conditions being inflicted on him with torture. Now, at this rally, we are not making an appeal to the Australian establishment. We are not asking Morrison and his Liberal National Coalition government or the Labor Party headed by that pro-US servant of Australian big business Bill Shorten. We are appealing to the working class and youth of Australia and through social media, the world. In the name of the working people, we demand that the Australian government intervenes and exercise the full weight of its diplomatic power and the legal discretion that it does have to compel the government of Great Britain to immediately cease the arbitrary detention of Assange and allow him to leave the Ecuadorian embassy in London and return unharmed and unhindered to this country with full protection against any US request for his extradition. The truth of the situation is very, very simple. If Julian was not threatened with arrest by British authorities on a bail-related matter stemming from a warrant issued on the basis of false accusations by Swedish prosecutors that were dropped by those prosecutors nearly 2 years ago, and the very real danger that British courts would sanction his extradition to the US, he could leave the embassy. He is not in there by personal choice. He is in there because he faces the danger of being sent to the United States for a show trial on espionage charges or conspiracy charges. Julian was never charged over the slanderous claims manufactured in Sweden, lies that were endlessly repeated by all the enemies of democratic rights to justify the persecution of Julian and to try to silence WikiLeaks. It is no less a lie that Julian worked with the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 US presidential election. WikiLeaks did what journalists should do. They were provided anonymous leaks that exposed the right-wing, militarist, big business character of Democratic Party candidate Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party's efforts to undermine the rights of the 13 million people who had voted in the primaries for Bernie Sanders because he said he was a socialist and was for a political revolution. WikiLeaks told the truth. All the years of lies about the sexual allegations and the 2016 Democratic Party leaks have been exposed in the recent days as what WikiLeaks always said they were, the means to try to destroy Assange as an individual and WikiLeaks as an independent media organisation. Julian Assange does not face prosecution over fake charges of fake allegations of suspicion of sexual assault or for anything to do with the 2016 presidential election. He faces criminal prosecution because WikiLeaks published hundreds of thousands of documents sent to it in 2009 and 2010 by a heroic young American intelligence analyst, Chelsea Manning. All those media organisations, editors and journalists who worked with WikiLeaks in 2010 to publish those leaks, but then threw into the wolves, had better begin to consider the implications. The Trump administration is moving to file the first ever criminal charges against a media publisher, WikiLeaks, using the powers of the 1917 Espionage Act. As even a New York Times lawyer an organisation that has particularly played a foul role in the vilification of Julian. As even a New York Times lawyer stated, such a precedent would be, quote, chilling. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, the Payers, and in this country, the Sydney Morning Herald, would no less be criminally liable for any charges pressed against WikiLeaks. By refusing to defend Julian Assange, the Australian political establishment, the Australian media, and the media union in particular, the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, have helped create the conditions for a frontal assault on all journalists and all freedom of speech. Already Google and Facebook, in collaboration with state agencies, have extended the persecution initiated against WikiLeaks in 2010 to the open and flagrant censorship of virtually all independent, left-wing, critical, anti-war online media publications, including the publication of our organisation, the World Socialist website. The defence of Julian Assange is a matter of fundamental principle. Now, we have no illusions today about what we face. The fight to free Julian and the fight to free Chelsea Manning will most likely be both difficult and protracted. The Australian government, whether it's headed by the Coalition or Labor in a few weeks or months, or some other combination of the parliamentary parties, the Australian government represents the interests of the Australian corporate elite. That elite has massive investments in the US, and it relies on the US-Australia military alliance to protect its interests in Asia and beyond. That is why the Australian government over decades has sent troops to Vietnam, to Afghanistan and to Iraq, why it allows the base at Pine Gap where the nuclear missiles are targeted, why it allows the continual use of Australian military bases by long-range American bombers and warships, for the interest of the Australian capitalist class. That is why they have put Australian people on the front line of the US-led strategic military confrontation with China that represents one of the greatest threats of a Third World War. And that is why those successive governments, from the outrages of the Gillard government at the end of 2010 to the current silence and complicity of the coalition under Morrison, why they refuse to defend Julian. They will not risk a disruption to their relations with Washington unless it faces a mass movement of workers and young people from below. Now that is what we must build. That is what this campaign is about. It is not about one-off protests in Sydney or one-off protests in Melbourne or another protest at the Ecuadorian embassy. It is about the development of a political movement. As I explained last Sunday, the SEP will be making the persecution of Assange and the silence of the Australian establishment a major issue in the upcoming election. The most important task, however, is to bring the strength of the working class into this struggle. The fight to free Assange must become part of all the actions by workers, whether over their conditions, over the state of our education system, over the state of our health system, in defence of democracy, against the danger of climate change, and especially against the mounting dangers of a Third World War. On the university campus and tapes in the high schools, action must continue to be organised by students and information circulated about the truth of Julian and the truth of the stand taken by Chelsea Manning. I know that there are strikes going to be taking place across Australia by high school students this coming Friday. On Friday, March 15th, young people, sick and tired of the inaction over the danger of climate change, are going to be rallying to demand action. I appeal to those students, raise the demand for the freedom of Assange and Manning as well. The struggle of young people for their future needs an independent and critical media. Whistleblowers like Manning, who are prepared to risk everything to let the people know the truth, and fearless journalists like Julian Assange, who are prepared to publish it. At workplaces across the country, I again appeal for workers to organise meetings and move motions defending Assange's freedom. I also once again make a specific appeal to the journalists and media workers whose voices are being suppressed by the MEAA. Raise your voice in defence of your colleague, a persecuted publisher and journalist. Finally, I have been informed that Julian Assange has seen the reports and speeches from last weekend's rally in Sydney and that he was moved by the support expressed. He will hear about this rally as well. He is not alone and he will be freed. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Our second speaker today is Sue Phillips, a long-standing member of the Socialist Equality Party and a teacher for over 30 years. Sue is the national convener of the Committee for Public Education, which aims to spearhead a political movement of teachers, education support staff, academics, students and parents in a fight for access to a free, high quality and secular public education system as a social right for all. I ask you to warmly welcome her.
Thank you. The Committee for Public Education resolutely stands in solidarity with Julian Assange. We salute the bravery of Chelsea Manning, who has stood firm, refusing to incriminate WikiLeaks and Assange over her courageous disclosure of thousands of documents exposing US war crimes. Manning's defence is inseparable from the struggle to free Assange. We condemn the malicious and anti-democratic treatment of Assange and call for his immediate and unconditional freedom. The Australian government must be forced to act, using its diplomatic and legal powers to secure Julian's safe return home with a guaranteed protection against extradition to the United States. This can and will only be achieved through the independent action of workers and young people internationally. Julian Assange is a hero, a courageous, genuinely independent journalist. His WikiLeaks revelations have educated and changed the consciousness of masses of ordinary people. They have lifted the veil of secrecy, inspiring the overthrow of corrupt and criminal governments. Nothing terrifies governments more than the truth. That is why the Trump administration in the United States, the May government in Britain, and the Morrison government here, backed by the US Democrats and the British and Australian Labor parties, regard Julian as a dangerous enemy. The attack on Assange is not an isolated event, but part of a global assault on the fundamental rights of young people and the working class, including freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom from internet censorship, and from dictatorship and war. The very same governments silencing Assange are carrying out a social counter-revolution against the conditions of workers, consciously targeting students and educators' rights to a fully resourced, high-quality public education. Just as the assault on democratic rights is global, so too is the international onslaught on public education. Right now, millions of teachers and educators are taking strike action across 5 continents as part of an international upsurge spreading through North America to South America, Europe, Africa and Asia. Strikes are underway by teachers in Kenya, Mali, Mexico, Iran and India, with a list of teachers' strikes erupting once again right across the United States. Significantly, this rebellion is being organised from below via social media and Facebook, with many protests and strikes organised outside and in opposition to the unions, which have systematically worked to straitjacket, isolate and betray the teachers' struggles. Without the World Socialist website's coverage, no one would be aware of these momentous upheavals, which are being driven by ever-deepening social inequality, creating a powerful commonality to teachers' demands, against budget cuts and privatisation, against high-stakes testing and narrowing of the curriculum, increased workloads and performance reviews, for better staffing, including education support staff, psychologists and much-needed nurses in schools. Teachers are not just fighting for themselves, but for the interests and rights of students, for the future of the next generation, which faces immense social and political challenges. In strike after strike, teachers and students are uniting to fight for a fully resourced and enlightened education, which constitutes the very foundation of a democratic society. Every day, in working class communities across the world, teachers confront the impact of the economic and social crisis in the classroom. Children who don't have enough to eat, from families who are living on poverty incomes, to students and parents who are suffering from drug addiction, mental health problems, trauma and other untreated illnesses. If a student's test results decline, teachers and schools are blamed for underperforming, creating conditions for closures and further privatisation. While teachers are told there's no money for public schools, billions are being funneled into the private school system. As a result of this, Australia now has one of the most unequal education systems in the world. In the public schools, the encouragement of critical thought, curiosity, creativity, physical skills and the engagement with the arts is increasingly being eliminated, taken over by a data-driven business model of standardised testing. What the government and authorities demand is the regimentation of young people educated in the spirit of passivity, conformity and obedience, to be work-ready for the military or for mind-numbing low-paid jobs in global corporations such as Amazon. Fearing a growing rebellion, Australian state and federal governments, assisted by the teacher unions, are attempting to intimidate, victimise teachers with legal restraints, confidentiality and gag clauses, and the prohibition of political discussion. Following last year's 10-year teachers' strike in Oklahoma, legislation is being prepared to punish teachers for striking and ban them for standing for office or campaigning for political candidates. Political discussion will be prohibited during the school day or while employed, and classroom discussion deemed controversial, banned. In addition, teachers will be forbidden from opposing military and police recruiters in the classroom. Teachers are nevertheless insisting on their democratic rights. The right to raise our voices in opposition, for free speech, the right to debate, discuss, organise and communicate independently without government, state or union interference. And we insist on the right to access independent information, including an uncensored internet. In the midst of the recent 7-day strike in Oakland, California, teachers and students established their own rank and file committee, independent from and opposed to the union and the Democratic Party that were preparing to sell out the strike. Yesterday, I received powerful greetings to this rally from the Oakland Rank and File Committee, which I would like to read. The Oakland Rank and File Committee to Defend Public Education sends greetings to the rallies demanding freedom from Julian Assange. We unequivocally defend the democratic right that ordinary workers have the right to be informed and make decisions on public matters. Assange and Chelsea Manning are being persecuted for their exposure of the lies and crimes of US imperialism. We reject the crude frame-up used to confine Assange to the Ecuadorian embassy and oppose all government efforts to censor the media and criminalise dissent. David Brown, on behalf of the Oakland Rank and File Committee to Defend Public Education. Last week, teachers and education support staff at Footscray City Secondary College here in Melbourne passed a resolution endorsing the Socialist Equality Party rallies in Sydney and Melbourne, demanding the government immediately act to free Assange. This is the second time in the last 9 months that Footscray teachers have come to the defence of Assange, reflecting the growing intransigence of teachers everywhere. The resolutions were moved by teachers associated with the Committee for Public Education and the Socialist Equality Party. This powerful political lead from Footscray and Oakland teachers must be extended and broadened. Leaflets must be widely distributed at schools, universities, TAFEs and factories, transforming this growing oppositional sentiment expressed here at the rally into an international political movement of workers and youth. A movement that will win freedom for Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and all the democratic and social rights of the working class, including the right of every student for a free, high-quality public education. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Our final speaker today is Ephraim Gaskin, leader of the Socialist Equality Party's youth movement in Melbourne, the International Youth and Students for Social Equality, or as we know it, the IYSSE. Ephraim and the IYSSE have played a pivotal role in the defence of Julian Assange and, importantly, in the building of this rally. Our campus clubs around the country have held numerous speak-outs, meetings and discussions with literally thousands of students, explaining the significance of Assange's exposure of war crimes and state intrigues, his implacable commitment to democratic rights, and the immense relevance of this to the lives of this generation of youth. I'd like you to welcome Ephraim.
On behalf of the IYSSE, I would especially like to thank the students and young people that have taken a stand and joined this rally. The criminal decision by the Trump administration to detain Chelsea Manning on Friday makes clear the importance of this protest. In 2019, the government of the most powerful imperialist country is detaining a whistleblower to coerce her into testifying against a journalist and publisher, Julian Assange. This is the cutting edge of attempts by governments and the corporate elite to abolish free speech, censor the internet, and suppress the mass anti-war sentiment that exists, particularly among young people. Our international movement and its youth section, the IYSSE, will not accept the renewed attack on Manning or the attempts to prosecute Julian Assange. We will mount a campaign at universities, at TAFEs, and at high school campuses across the country and internationally to demand the immediate release of Manning and freedom for Assange. Manning's courageous actions in 2010 and today are the highest expression of a political radicalization of millions of students and young people around the world. She joined the army and was sent to Iraq in 2009. Witnessing the atrocities of the illegal US-led occupation, she took it upon herself to reveal to the world the horrors of the predatory wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the daily diplomatic intrigues of the imperialist powers all over the world. Her decision to take action expressed the hostility of masses of people around the world to criminal wars for oil, for resources, and for geostrategic dominance. Manning's refusal to cooperate with the grand jury witch hunt of Assange and WikiLeaks over the past week also has a broader significance. She is giving voice to the intense opposition of the working class and young people to the turn of governments everywhere to authoritarianism and dictatorship. Governments that represent a parasitic financial elite and that are preparing more wars and military disasters. It is up to us now to show the same determination and fight that Manning has displayed. Everywhere, the call must go out. Hands off Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. The detention of Manning has demonstrated once again that the US-led vendetta against Julian Assange is aimed at ending his work as a journalist and publisher and shutting down WikiLeaks. One of the key reasons they're persecuting Assange is because they know how much WikiLeaks has done to educate an entire generation of workers and young people. We've seen this in our own campaigns. Young people from all corners of the globe have learned about the wars, surveillance, and diplomatic intrigues of the major powers through WikiLeaks. As one Victoria University IYSC member, originally from Afghanistan, said, quote, "Assange is not just a person, he is our voice. He is the words that we want to say. We all are responsible. What he did for us was to let us know the truths that were hidden from us. Now it is our responsibility to support him." Australian governments, no less than their American counterparts, want this process of political education to end. They want young people to be ignorant and deprived of the truth about what is really going on. That's why successive governments, beginning with the Gillard Labor government, have joined the attacks on Assange. They don't want young people and students to know that senior Labor MPs, including Bill Shorten, are protected sources of the US Embassy, that is, spies for the US government. They don't want young people to know about the brutality and criminality of Australian SAS troops in Afghanistan, who are implicated in extrajudicial killings, torture, and the desecration of corpses. They don't want us to learn about Australia's integration into a massive US-led military build-up in the Asia-Pacific region in preparation for war with China. And they don't want young people alerted to the fact that the Australian intelligence agencies are working with the US National Security Agency to monitor all of our communications.
But we know.
But it is not just Australian governments that have lined up against Assange. A whole host of organisations that once claimed to defend him, from the Australian press to the trade unions, the Greens, and the pseudo-left, have all abandoned Assange. This can only be understood as a class response. At the beginning of 2011, workers and youth were propelled into struggles to topple the Ben Ali government in Tunisia and the Mubarak regime in Egypt. These revolutionary movements were sparked in part by cables and documents published by WikiLeaks revealing government corruption, intimate ties with the US state and intelligence agencies, torture, and the government's pillaging from the population. The fake left, the unions and the Greens, representing the privileged layers of the upper middle class, watched in horror as hundreds of thousands of workers and youth engaged in a political struggle. They saw the propulsion of masses of workers and youth into struggle by the publication of leaked documents by WikiLeaks as an existential threat to the social order upon which their wealth and privileges are based. They responded accordingly, dispensing with the opposition to war they once professed and throwing Assange to the wolves. They have the same desire as the ruling elite, that is, an end to the WikiLeaks model of truthful and honest journalism, conducted outside the control of the corporations and official political and media establishment. But while these organisations have made their peace with imperialist war and repression, millions of workers and young people are entering into struggle against militarism, authoritarianism, the destruction of the environment, and social inequality. This is the social force that will defend democratic rights. It is in the working class that we must build the mass movement that will secure the freedom of Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and all persecuted journalists and whistleblowers.
Thanks, Ephraim. Looks like we're just going to make the weather. In our June rally last year, the Socialist Equality Party pledged that this was not going to be a one-off event. And as James said when he spoke, we aren't just holding a couple of protests. We've kept our word. Not only have we carried out this event, but we've maintained a steady stream of analysis and articles on the World Socialist website about developments relating to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks in collaboration with the sections of our party around the world. We're calling on everyone here today to participate in widening this struggle, and I want to mention 4 ways in which this can be done. Firstly, we want you to spread the word. We have to spread reportage of this rally and of World Socialist website articles on WikiLeaks and Julian Assange via social media, email updates to family and friends, resolutions at workplaces and universities and schools, demanding that the Morrison government frees Assange. Secondly, we have writers from the World Socialist website who are going to be positioned at the bookstall who are ready and waiting to interview you, take your photograph. We've found on the World Socialist website that when ordinary people speak to us, it gains traction, and we urge you to participate in the rally in that manner. Thirdly, I would urge everyone here to donate to the Socialist Equality Party's ongoing and developing campaign to free Assange. We urgently need funds to finance both this and further events in the future. I have here one of the items you can do that by, and that is the free Julian Assange t-shirts, which are located back at the on top of the bookstore. These are selling for $15. We also have literature on Julian Assange, which contain many of the articles written on the World Socialist website. These can be purchased for $5 singularly or $8 for 2 of them. And there is other literature at the table which I would urge you to purchase. Finally, we urge you to join the Socialist Equality Party's 2019 federal election campaign. Julian Assange and the freedom of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning will be at the centre of this, as will a campaign to unify the working class against war. In concluding, I want to sincerely thank all of you for participating in this important event. We send our solidarity and support to the Julian Assange Defence Committee, to everyone fighting for democratic rights, social equality, and to Chelsea Manning, and above all, to Julian Assange himself. Thank you.
Authorised by James Hogan for the Socialist Equality Party, Suite 906, 185 Elizabeth Street, Sydney, New South Wales 2000.